mostly rough. It's completely rough on the back end. It's mostly rough on the front, and that's for a reason. And that's because my parents came from tough beginnings, humble beginnings, from grandparents who started off as homesteaders, as people who came up from not the best social status to what they became, much more polished, but hard as rock. For my dad, he worked at a pace that allowed him to do 1,000 plus homicides, but it started from the beginning. When we were growing up, and make no mistake, we grew up together. My dad and mom got married when they were 16 and 17, and I may have been at the wedding. My dad, in order to take care of his family, worked during the week as a milkman while he was going to law school. Sometimes that didn't go entirely as he planned. In fact, on the second day of his work, he was given a truck to drive that you had to stand and turn you had to shift the gears while you were standing. And he thought he was doing a really good job, because he would look back and people would wave. He would look back more and people would wave, until he noticed that somebody was running behind him, and he had hooked the car from someone and was dragging it down the street. But he didn't quit, and he learned how to drive it a little bit better, and the neighbors forgave him, and he continued on. And on weekends he would work at his grandfather's store, and like none of us, when he was applying for the job at a bigger store, said, sure, I can use the bandsaw. And that went great all the way through his first day, until the blade broke and was flapping around, and he didn't know what the big red button was for. But he didn't lose his job, and he persevered, and he kept on working, because he didn't give up. Many people who knew Greg would see this. It's a ring, and I'm proud to wear it now. But it has the scales of justice on it, and you'll see that on the gravestone the scales appear there too. But for my dad, and by the way, some people would have also seen his little convertible, which also had justice as his license plate name. But what did it mean for him? It wasn't just a sing justice. It was I object to injustice. The reason for the scales is to have something to remind them of what it meant to be Greg Brodsky. What it meant to be Greg Brodsky, I object, my lord. I object to injustice everywhere. And what he taught is what to do about it. You could complain among your friends, you could sit in a bar, and that's not him. The goal that he tried to teach us is to see injustice and to stand up and do something about it. And that was Greg. He would look for injustice everywhere. You know some of his cases. He found he needed to object to the treatment of battered women who were convicted of murders that they were not guilty of, because they stood up to their batterers. He changed the law related to people who were not criminally responsible for offenses, who were sitting in penitentiaries all over the country, who knew that what they did was illegal, but had no idea they were doing anything morally wrong. And was he tough? In the olden days, you had to apply for applications for leave before you can go to the Supreme Court. And he applied in front of Justice Lemaire, and Justice Lemaire said, just a minute, Mr. Brodsky. You want us, the Supreme Court of Canada, to overrule a case called McNaughton, which is one of the most famous cases in English common law. That takes a lot of guts. You're wrong, you know, but it takes a lot of guts, and we're going to show you how wrong you are, because we're going to give you leave, and we'll tell you in our judgment why you're wrong. He won 9-0, and they overruled the McNaughton case in Canada in a case called Chalk and Morissette, because he stuck to those principles. We saw injustice, and he couldn't sit still. I can tell you that today, I don't exactly know what he would have done, but the murder of innocents is not something that he could have sat down for. I'm not sure what he would have done, whether it was raising money or whether it was speaking out against what's going on in the Middle East, whether it's to defend those who have a right to defend, whatever it would be. He would look at the ring, he'd be reminded to object. I object, my lord. Interestingly enough, if it was written my lord, which is how you see it written sometimes, that's a person who comes from high society who's speaking to someone from high society. But the my lord is there for a reason. One, it's the way we used to speak to our Court of Appeal judges, and two, it's what a commoner would speak to when they were speaking to, when they had come into that society and were speaking to others in that society. My mother, like I said, my mother and dad, we've been together since they were 16 or 17. One of the things that the rabbi mentioned, and it's right, is there never was a time that it wasn't Greg or Sylvia. And it makes sense to do the unveiling as Greg and Sylvia, because that's who they were. They were like one of those Asian yin and yang. My mother completed my father, and one of the things she told us as kids is never make threats unless you carried them through. And Mom, you're living this one, because my mom took care of my dad. My dad could be king of everything outside the house, but once he walked across the threshold, it was my mom's domain. And one of the things that she couldn't stand is a mess. In other words, when we were growing up, we had orange juice on the counter, and we went into the other room to go pat the dog or to go answer the telephone, and came back. No glass. Because Ma, where's my orange juice? Well, I thought you were finished with it, so I washed it and put it away. And Aaron and I threatened. And my mom didn't like us to make idle threats, so Mom, we're not making idle threat. We always said, one day, it's going to say, here lies Sylvia Brodsky, don't make a mess. But more than that, as a couple, my mom didn't want my dad to make a mess of things. And there wasn't one single case, not one single argument, not one single performance where he played Captain Queeg on Rainbow Stage, where Mom didn't see the rehearsals, didn't look at him and say, oh, come on, Gerald, that's never going to fly. They were a team. You didn't always see her out in front, but she was there in absolutely everything that they did together. Every case, every mess, and he did it without complaint. When it was Greg, time to do the laundry, he couldn't think of to do the laundry himself, and he couldn't figure out how to boil an egg. But he would do the laundry, and he'd turn the stove on, and he'd clean up because they were a team. He knew if she was asking, it needed to be done. Don't make a mess at home, and don't make a mess in public. If you're going to do something, do it right. I'll support you. I'll help you. Don't make sometimes, especially when you're talking to Court of Appeal judges and they have to make decisions that'll have implications, you can't see where it's necessarily going to go. But do the best you can not to make a mess. And between the two of them, the don't make a mess, I object, my lord, they would have something for you, and that the takeaway message from them and what they would want their legacy to be is go out and change the world, object to injustice, and do your best not to make a mess of things. That's what they would hope their legacy would be. And so it's a celebration. It's a lot easier than we were here last time during the snowstorm. Greg clearly, and my mom, objected to going. Nobody, if you weren't here for the funeral, maybe if you were here at the funeral, you'd know. If you weren't, you might not. But the vehicle carrying my father got stuck in the snow, and the distance it took wasn't the few feet that it usually takes, but at least from a football field away. My dad is saying, "I object, my lord." I could hear it as I saw the pallbearers in the distance. So at least this is perfect. It's a perfect day. It's a perfect weather. It's clear that they're settled, and the message is go out and change the world. Now, if anyone else wants to stand and say a few words, please